It's noon on a Friday in the mid-90s. We're somewhere in Darfur, a region in southwestern Sudan. A man rides a camel through the deserts, followed by the entire herd and some members of his family. He is tall and imposing, but has little formal education. He dropped out of school early to become a camel trader, something typical of the Mahariya Rezgat tribe, of which he's part. The sun is shining and the sand is burning hot, but everyone is used to it here. This is just a regular day for camel herding across the wadis of the region. Suddenly, in the distance, he sees a group of men approaching his trade convoy. They're armed. It's an ambush. In the span of only a few minutes, there's a shootout. As the dust clears up, he notices he's intact and sound. But that day, it is said that about 60 of his family members and kinsmen are killed, and his camels looted. The man's name is Muhammad Hamdan Dagalo, but the people in the region call him Hameti. Since that day, he was never the same again. Hameti's career path is very different from the one of another man living on the other side of the country, in a village called Gandatu. This man graduated from school and then headed to the military academy. He slowly climbs the ranks of the army, but with his eyes locked on one thing: becoming commander. His name is Abdel Fattah Al-Burhan. Hameti and Al-Burhan are no ordinary men. In the 21st century, both will go on to lead two different armies, massacre millions of people, and exploit many of Sudan's core resources. Eventually, they will lead a coup and rule the country together for multiple years until, blinded by power, each decides to annihilate the other and become the supreme ruler of Sudan to protect their interests. This is the story of how two men plunged one of Africa's largest countries deep into the worst humanitarian crisis in recent history.
The scale of what is happening now is unprecedented.
Khartoum is empty.
I can't tell you where I see Sudan going.
There's no Sudan anymore.
مستحيل يحصل بيناتنا قتال اصلا، ولا في زول بيدعو لحاجه، ولا في زول بيدعو لاي خلاف، لان احنا قضيتنا واحده، انه دايرين نلم السودان ده ونحفظه تجيها مامونه تستلموا مننا.
The current Sudanese war has received very little coverage in mainstream media. I mean, why do Palestine and Ukraine have way more coverage? The reality is that few people ever hear about Sudan outside of Sudan, whether it's at war or not. And usually no one really cares about what they don't already know or feel connected to somehow. And the few who do hear about it usually think, another African nation at war with black people fighting against each other. Oh, and they're Muslim and Arab too? That explains it. Thinking like that is problematic in so many ways. This reasoning stems from racial empathy bias. And that's because there's not enough humanization of the Sudanese people, their culture, history, and their struggles, which I'm also guilty of not knowing before actually going there. But I ended up living in Khartoum for a month right before the war. And there I witnessed an extremely abundant culture, experienced things like nowhere else, and made friends for life. This documentary follows parts of those people's lives, pre-war and post-war, shows what has changed for them and the city, and tackles the question of hope and the notion of identity in a war that goes beyond two greedy generals and their thirst for power. Because the truth is, foreign countries are obviously at play here. This is a typical sneaky proxy war for external interests, control, and obviously resources: gold, oil, weapons, and strategic bases. And it's the people of Sudan who are caught in the middle of it and suffer. Tens of millions who have been neglected, impoverished, and forgotten. What's been happening in Sudan is extremely unfair and simply disgusting. And that's why humanizing the Sudanese is so important to get involved and help and understand that they matter as much as anyone else on the planet. That's why this is not just a documentary about the Sudanese war. It's the story of a city you probably know nothing about. A city full of beauty and richness that should not be forgotten or overshadowed by the current war. This is the beautiful and tragic story of the city of Khartoum and the people of Sudan. If you're new here, hi, my name is Rob and I'm cycling across Africa from Cairo, Egypt to Cape Town, South Africa. Along with my friends Flo and Tim, we had just cycled 1,000 kilometers across the vast desert stretch in northern Sudan and finally reached Khartoum, a city of about 6 million inhabitants. The crossing was hot, quite desolate most of the time, and surprisingly eye-opening. But what stood out to me the most was how peaceful and safe the region seemed, and the outstanding hospitality of the few people we met. They're very hospitable, it's amazing.
I love Sudan so much. The people are so kind and sweet. There's some problems right here, but the people make it safe, the people that live here.
ما شاء الله بلد هادي ما فيش مشاكل بلد آمن يستقبل أي حدا جايو.
The warm welcome from locals didn't end with the Sahara Desert we left behind. As soon as we arrived in Khartoum, a man called Talal immediately hosted us. Talal, our couch surfing host, thank you for hosting us.
You're welcome.
Talal is a Sudanese electrical engineer living in a suburb of Khartoum called Durman. For context, Sudan's capital city is divided into 3 main areas interconnected by bridges: Khartoum Central, Bahri, and Durman, where Talal was hosting us. Man, it's incredible to speak to you after almost a year. So much has changed. I'm so happy that you're alive still. You've gone through so much. I don't even know where to start with the questions. But alhamdulillah, you made it to Saudi safe and sound.
Alhamdulillah. Till now, it's a shock for everyone there. Most of the Sudanese, they left. People lost their homes, their money, their jobs. Now I'm in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah city. I did find a new job. So it's a new life.
When I was first warmly welcomed by Talal, never in my wildest thoughts would I have had imagined that only a month later, a brutal war would spread all across Sudan and create the world's worst displacement crisis of recent times. About 12 million people so far out of Sudan's 44 million inhabitants have been pushed out of their homes, either displaced internally across the country or abroad as refugees. Things have never been the same since the start of the war. But when we lived there for a month, Khartoum was a vibrant city that I was excited to explore. And first things first was running errands. I had to repair my snapped tent poles, and we had to get our bikes serviced. Day 2 in Khartoum, and we are fixing our bikes. Just little maintenance, it's very important. The next task was finding an ATM that worked. Believe it or not, only one in the whole country accepted foreign cards to retrieve cash. And it took a whole day to figure it out.
Home of trust. You lost my trust there.
Yes, Khartoum was lively, but it had its problems. It was easy to notice the daily challenges that locals face here. And there were many reasons for them to be present. Since independence from Britain in the 1950s, the country has experienced a roller coaster of political instabilities. It has undergone 2 major civil wars, multiple government fallouts, and 19 attempted military coups, 7 of which were successful. In more recent times, it was one of the most heavily sanctioned countries in the world. The ruling National Congress Party instigated genocides and war crimes against hundreds of thousands of ethnic minorities and mismanaged the economy so poorly that Sudan had the 3rd highest currency inflation in the world and had links to terrorist groups. It even sheltered this cute guy and his right-hand men. Many of those misfortunes happened under the 30-year-long rule of this man, Omar al-Bashir. Remember his name. He and his government are the main reason Sudan looks like it does today. He initially rose to power after organizing a military coup in 1989 and has since been at the head of the government until 2019. Today, he's considered a fugitive accused for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide by the International Criminal Court. Every region of the world has its dark sides and undeniable bad guys, and it's important to learn about them to understand the status quo. But reading history is never enough. That's why I was very excited to explore and experience the city. So, what does Khartoum have to offer? I couldn't think of one thing that stood out to me when I thought of Khartoum. Apart from maybe the Corinthia Hotel, also known as Gaddafi's Egg, one of the most luxurious hotels in town, which was built with the money donated by Libya's dictator, Muammar Gaddafi. But I knew deep down that Khartoum had more to offer. We just had to dig in the right places.
People make a big mistake by trying to discover Sudan like Egypt or like Ethiopia. You will miss a lot if you miss that communication and contact with the locals. Discover the people, discover the culture.
Talal wasn't the only Sudanese we would learn from here. In our first days in the city, we quickly started meeting many other Sudanese locals. We have a new friend. His name is Muhammad.
Hey.
Introduce yourself in 10 seconds.
My name is Mohammed. I'm 23 years old. I'm a university student. I'm a full-time Sudanese from the head to the knees. I'm a huge proponent of Sudan. I want everybody to come out, check our country out. Super underrated, just like Rob said. Nobody really knows anything about Sudan. It kind of falls back on us as Sudanese. We don't really do too much of a good job, or we don't really care about showing the world what we're about. But there's so much to be said, there's so much to be seen, there's so much to be done, and so many stories. In terms of stories, like Sudan is probably one of the richest, if not the richest countries in Africa, just out of sheer diversity alone. So many people, so many different tribes, cultures, languages, everything, bro, everything.
What happened when the war started with you specifically?
With me personally, as you remember, I left Sudan even before you guys did. I wasn't emotionally prepared in any sense to face something like this. Like, you know, now we have like the internet now, you see everything live. So in that moment, seeing the war break out is so surreal. And you saw how Khartoum was. It's not like we were living in any sort of paradise, but there was life. We had a life, we had friends, we had social lives, we had fun, we had things we do, we had things we were working towards. I'm a student, I was studying.
Muhammad was an agricultural engineering student at the University of Khartoum, and he later introduced us to his good friend and fellow engineering classmate, Siddig. First of all, I love your t-shirt, Yalla do it.
You.
That's the spirit.
I am Siddig Ashraf, agriculture and biological engineering student, and at the same time I'm a freelance photographer.
Siddig took us to a place he loves to photograph. An underrated but symbolic location in the city.
Confluence of the two Niles, the White Nile, the Blue Nile.
Khartoum is a key city on the Nile River. It's where the Blue Nile and the White Nile meet. The Blue Nile comes from Lake Tana in Ethiopia and the White Nile from Lake Victoria in Uganda. They eventually merge upstream in Khartoum and become one massive river that flows across the country's vast north and then into Egypt until eventually reaching the Mediterranean Sea. This long journey across all those vast countries technically makes the Nile the longest river in the world. The Nile River is one of many geographical and topographical elements that make Sudan a strategic point regionally, alongside the country's prime access to the Red Sea, the world's most vital choke points, and especially its rich mineral deposits scattered all across its lands. All these advantages Sudan has with being geopolitically placed where it is make the current war involve a lot of foreign powers, including the UAE, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Yemen, Libya, and obviously Russia through the Wagner Group. All these foreign powers care to secure their interests, and do so by supporting the different entities that are currently fighting with weapons, money, and support based on what they can get through them, with absolutely no regards to the tens of thousands of deaths and the displacement of millions that are a direct consequence of the fighting.
Alhamdulillah, feeling alive. I think that's the main thing. Not hearing any bombs, any gunshots. I'm in Saudi now and I'm safe, but I'm sad. I want to go back. The city we love, we liked, we lived in is destroyed completely.
Recently, I stumbled upon some Google Earth images of all the monuments and neighborhoods and bridges that we often walked by during our time in the city, and it truly shocked me. The main bridges connecting all three sides of the capital city were destroyed. The biggest towers were all empty, looted, and covered in bullet holes. The government buildings were empty and demolished. The streets had no life anymore.
Khartoum is empty, you could say. Especially the area around the airport.
That's where we stayed after staying at your place, man. And it's just crazy to see a huge city, the biggest city in a country of 44 million people, empty. It just goes to show the scale of destruction that this war brought, and it's very scary. It's Tim's birthday today. How are you feeling?
I'm so happy to be here.
The hottest birthday he will ever have. 38 degrees in February.
Wow.
That night, Siddig invited all of us to his family house for our best dinner in Sudan so far. We're getting invited by Siddiq's family for an amazing dinner. And obviously to celebrate Tim's special day.
Happy birthday to you. Sana
Siddig's cousins, aunts, and uncles were also here, which made the vibe even more heartwarming. As we had already seen while cycling up north in Nubia, family and community are extremely important in Sudan. Sudanese hospitality. I'm not gonna stop saying this in this country because it's been everywhere. It's beautiful. Siddig's sisters and a family friend, Rihab, decided to decorate Flo's hands with henna.
This is Rihab, and she's gonna be doing some henna on my hands as well today.
This semi-permanent tattoo is a sign of beauty in many regions of the world, including Sudan. It's a whole process and has a strong cultural significance here.
Henna is a traditional thing and really it makes us beautiful. So like in Eid, we can go with our face without any makeup, just doing henna. Social media makes people like, you have to be white, you have to put makeup, you have. But now I think people understand that once you love yourself, you'll find that you are much beautiful. So I really want all the girls in Sudanese to keep with this color and don't change it. No need to be white. And by henna, yeah, you feel so beautiful.
Henna is an awesome reminder that beauty is not expressed the same in all parts of the world, which makes the concept of beauty itself a lot more nuanced and complex, as it should be.
Look at these hands. They look so beautiful.
You will stay looking at your hand all day.
Yeah, I'll just like continue.
We usually do that.
The next day, Talala wanted to show me another cultural practice that happens here, which is also a central aspect of his life and beliefs. Talal is a Sufi.
Today we're looking at Sufism in Sudan. This is crazy. I didn't expect that much energy.
Sufism is a mystical form of Islam that focuses on Islamic spirituality, ritualism, and purification through the inward search for God and the steering away from materialism.
In Arabic, it's from Safa, Moya Safia. It's mean a very clean water. To become a Sufi, it's to become clean person from inside, from your heart, clean from selfish, heat, anger, all this stuff.
Sudan has one of the largest Sufi communities in the world, and we were going to witness the weekly ceremony in the Sufi community of Durman. Each Friday, worshippers gather to pray and dance into a spiritual frenzy.
You will never know Sufism unless you be in touch with someone who are real Sufi person. It's exercising, not just to read books about Sufism.
So it's not just ideology and knowledge, it's also practice.
It's not philosophy thing that you could find in the books and you do.
That's why the ceremony is very pragmatic and community-based, full of music, prayers, and dances. We were first offered some tea. Most men were dressed in white jallabiyas. The worshippers joined the circle one by one. And finally, the sheikh walked in, hyping everyone up even more. What unites each Sufi order is dhikr. It's the belief that a path to God can be found through an absolute absorption in worship, during which prayers, dances, and spins are repeated with such energy that it induces a trance. As the sun lowers, the percussions and Islamic chants continue. Followers sway back and forth, forming a large circle around a group of musicians. They all hum Allah, Allah, which means God, God in Arabic.
You can see a lot of the guys here that are getting into a spiritual trance, and it's really interesting to witness. You can see they're in it, they're focused, they're enjoying the moment, they're praising their God. It's beautiful. I've never seen something like that.
Many Muslims frown upon the practices of Sufism, as they believe it is a false interpretation of Islam. But I think there's something to learn from their beliefs and habits and why they matter to some. Towards the end of the ceremony, people gather around the sheikh who gives a speech. Some of the worshippers get emotional because of the trance and how overwhelmed they are with love. As it starts getting dark, the ceremony ends with Maghrib prayers.
Music, it's connect people. It's art, all the art. It's from the soul side. Also, the one who created the poem or the one who made the music itself, if he was in a sense of love or a sense of peace, he could add or put these emotions in his arts, in his music, in his poem. So when you listen to it, when you dance, it could bring you to that level. That's why you could see people crying, screaming. The good thing that we still have active Sufism people, communities, villages, guides. Their mission is to teach the other people.
Community and cultural events are not limited to the religious aspects of Sudanese culture. Social gatherings take many forms, like for example, this other weekly event, the prominent Nuba wrestling tournament.
Nubian wrestling. That's how we roll here.
The Nuba people form an ethnic group originally from the Nuba Mountains, a region found in South Kordofan. They're distinct from the Nubian people that we met in the northern regions of Sudan. And almost every Friday at a stadium on the outskirts of Khartoum, hundreds of people gather to watch the Nuba wrestling tournament, a tribal practice that dates back thousands of years and that is culturally associated with harvest festivals in the aim to build group identity. After spreading white ash and sand over their bodies and performing unique moves and dances to demonstrate their superiority and their skills, the fight starts. The main goal is to slam the opponents to the ground. The win is celebrated with dances of triumph and are often carried around the ring by a member of their sports club. It's so much fun to watch. And as soon as the competition ends, the field is raided by young kids copying the guys they just watched, with a desire to be part of the tournament one day. But there's a darker truth to this event and to the Nuba people, which explains why this practice is so important. In the 1990s, under Omar al-Bashir's regime, there was a big ethnic and identity crisis in Sudan between African traditionalists and Arabs. The Sudanese government declared war against the Nuba, launching a genocidal and ethnocidal campaign with the help of militantly racist and pan-Arabist organizations. Out of the various groups al-Bashir relied on to crush the non-Arab tribes, one stands out: the Janjaweed, a collection of Arab militias drawn from the camel-herding tribes active in the region of Darfur. They were recruited and weaponized by al-Bashir to commit war crimes on his behalf. The closest translation of Janjaweeds would be devils on horseback. They killed about 100,000 people, and hundreds of thousands were internally displaced around Sudan. To this day, the Nuba people are spread all across the country. I remember meeting with two Nuba women who were displaced 1,000 miles up north from their hometown Kadugli into the northern desert of Sudan.
The issue with the Janjaweed and their tribes, they've had their issues with Congo Basin tribes, with ethnic African tribes. That's not going to end anytime soon, and the war is just like another reflection of that. So like they would have been killing each other regardless, but now that they have weapons and they have quote unquote like a goal they want to reach, it's just more of a justification to continue doing what they've already been doing, which is missions of like ethnic cleansing, tribal warfare. There's a lot of dehumanization that's involved with it. People from different tribes, they don't even consider other people humans. So killing them to them isn't an issue. That's what we're seeing right now.
What happened with the Nuba people also happened in 2003 at a much bigger scale in the regions of Darfur in southwest Sudan, after a full-scale rebellion against the government started. The uprisings were led by local Darfuris who couldn't accept al-Bashir's brutal rule anymore and the constant marginalization and disregard inflicted upon them. As a result, many Darfuris, also considered non-Arabs, were decimated by the Janjaweeds. Around 300,000 died and about 3 million were forced into refugee camps. Human rights groups have accused the Janjaweed of war crimes, including killings, rapes, and torture of civilians, all throughout the conflict. And guess who was appointed as the Janjaweed's commander during the genocide? Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, Hameti. He rose through the ranks of the militia in the years leading to the genocide, catching the eye of President al-Bashir. Today's war in Sudan can be directly linked to many of those past genocides towards non-Arab tribes and by the government and Arab militias. As we'll see later, those responsible for the massacres were never held accountable and kept growing in power. But they did not have enough power to stop the South Sudanese. Sudan was the biggest country in Africa before 2011, when South Sudan broke away from Sudan, declared independence, and became the newest country in the world.
South Sudan.
To get there, it took 2 civil wars spanning over 56 years, multiple famines, and millions of deaths and refugees. It was really bad for Sudan for a long time. There's this famous controversial photo of a boy dying of hunger and a vulture waiting to eat him in the heat of the Second Sudanese Civil War in 1993. Kevin Carter, the photographer who took the photo, committed suicide a few months after he took the picture, haunted by what he saw and photographed in Sudan. The reason why those wars and unthinkable atrocities happened is the same as the previous genocides: the marginalization of specific groups of people, human rights abuses, and no representation in the government on the basis of religion, ethnicity, and overall background. Even after South Sudan declared independence, both North and South Sudan are still incredibly divided politically, ethnically, and culturally, and have both gone through civil wars since then. And it's a bit hard to understand from an outsider's perspective, where do the division, racism, and the conflicts stem from? One interpretation could be that the combination of tribalism and the presence of a power-hungry authoritarian regime that fuels division makes it hard for the Sudanese to coexist. But I think it's linked to a bigger problem: the lack of a common identity. As you might have noticed by now, Sudan is incredibly diverse, which makes it a double-edged sword. It's a form of beauty and richness, sure, but also the source of a struggle for identity administered through local conflicts. Around 400 to 500 ethnic groups live just within North Sudan's border today, each with their own developed history, complex cultures, beliefs, and ways of life. This region of the world is a complex one geopolitically, with Sudan being at the edge of the Arab world, of the Sahara Desert, and of sub-Saharan Africa. That means Sudan has Arabs and Muslims, but also broader traditional Africans and animists of all kinds, with each subgroup of every background having their own belief system and way of life. And this raises a lot of important questions. Is Sudan African, Arab, or both? What does Arab or African even mean? What is it like to be Sudanese? What makes someone Sudanese?
The Sudanese psyche, it's a strange one. It's something that, like, I'm, as a Sudanese person, I'm very perplexed with, but I know that it's cultural. I know that the way Sudanese people talk about each other and different tribes and other people, it's really horrible. You know, it's very easy to blame things on colonialism, you know, because the British came in, they come in, they draw lines, they branch people together that don't belong together, they separate people of the same group, creates a whole bunch of issues. But at the same time, a lot of it is us. This is how we've been tribalists for years, for millennia, and it's bled over into our psyche.
I'm currently in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and I met Moon. Luckily, she was here at the time where the whole conflict started. She could have been in Khartoum, where she's based right now. What makes you Sudanese?
I think the question of what makes you Sudanese is a question a lot of Sudanese people are struggling with, because there's that issue of identity. It's the concept of tribalism, it's the concept of where you're from and who your family is. And I think one of the things that really helped me sort of understand my identity and clear a lot of the concerns that I had was actually thanks to Professor Muntasir Al-Tayyib. He had a research on the illusion of racial purity. In reality, there is no such thing as being of a pure bloodline. That does not exist. Sudan is not a country where you can actually just pinpoint where you're from. We're from everywhere.
It is this same God that made the Arabs, that made the Nuba, that made the Fur, that made the Dinka, that made the Nubians, that made the Bija, that made all the 500 different ethnic groups in the Sudan. We are all Sudanese, whether we are of Arab origin or of African origin.
That's why cultural practices and events like the Nuba wrestling are so important for each subgroup of people living in the country. For the Nuba people, the stadium is a space for them to connect with their cultural heritage, to which they pay tribute and revive their community spirits. This is so essential to practice after being dispersed across the country, away from their ancestral hometowns. And social events, music, ceremonies, tournaments, and dances are found all over Sudan. They're sometimes the only way to drive integration and strengthen a sense of collective identity, which prevents culture and tradition from disappearing through the divisions created by the authoritarian regime. While in Khartoum, I had the chance to see so many glimpses of Sudan's rich culture, whether crashing a typical Sudanese wedding,
tonight we are crashing a Sudanese party,
or going to the album release party of Muhammad's friend Hajid, who produced his own songs.
I've been high, I've been low, hands in the sky cause we all grow. Love me now before I go. Deuces.
Coincidentally, the album is called War and Peace, as if it were a premonition of what would happen to the whole country only a few weeks later. Around that time in Khartoum, things were not going great for me.
Muscle ache, sore throat, fever, and pain.
The weather was becoming unbearably hot, and I had to go to one of the few reliable hospitals in the country after Tim and I got pretty bad food poisoning and intense fever.
We're going to the hospital. Tim and I are I'm dead.
Problems were not over when we reached the hospital, as there were multiple power outages and long waiting queues. But locals were used to it here. The Sudanese have been struggling for a while with many of those problems that make their daily life challenging. Lack of electricity for long periods of time, poor healthcare, international sanctions that limit import-exports and international bank transfers, corruption on all levels of society, rising prices, and the list goes on. These problems have been on the rise for decades under al-Bashir's regime. Still, things got worse in his last few years in power, especially after South Sudan's independence, which took 75% of the oil reserves that Khartoum controlled through their new territory, a massive blow to Sudan's economy. The results are all you expect: heavy inflation, rising prices, and al-Bashir having to stop his system of bribes to the political elite and the military that helped him stay in power. To reinforce his rule after this big drawback, al-Bashir had to make radical decisions that affected the whole country at a scale rarely reached previously. In 2013, al-Bashir reorganized the Janjaweeds and renamed them the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. They remained under the command of Hameti, who was promoted to Lieutenant General. He was given further legitimacy and a large degree of autonomy, which he used to seize lucrative gold mines in Darfur belonging to rival tribal leaders. He multiplied his fortune many times and is currently one of the richest men in the country, if not the richest. He's pretty much a billionaire. The dictator al-Bashir was now in command of two armies: the Sudanese Armed Forces, in which Al-Burhan was at the time a high-ranking general, and the loyal Rapid Support Forces managed by Hameti. The latter was used to keep him in power by crushing any enemy or potential enemy, but al-Bashir's broken system designed to enrich him and his cronies was about to start breaking. In December of 2018, people had had enough. The government even failed to maintain something as simple as the price of bread. The quality of life was so low that the people needed to take action. This is the start of the Sudanese Revolution. All over the country, people took to the streets to protest their dictator, demanding democracy. For the first time in a long time, Sudan was being united in fighting against one common enemy and for one common cause. But there was a problem. Hameti and Al-Burhan were given too much power and control throughout the years, and they both noticed that they could use the civil unrest to give the people half of what they wanted. They would overthrow al-Bashir, but take over the government themselves. So the RSF and the Sudanese Armed Forces team up, oust al-Bashir in a coup d'etat, and send him to prison, ending his 3 decades of rule. They were now both at the head of the government, with Al-Burhan in charge, and established the Transitional Military Council in April of 2019. They cooperate in this transition and promise the people that they would eventually hand the country over to a civilian leader who will bring democracy to it. The country was finally emerging from decades of war and a broken system into a bright future led by a citizen movement. Democracy would be a vessel for ending corruption and finally take advantage of the incredible natural resources that Sudan's land has to offer, among many other changes. At the time, that civilian-led government even started integrating Sudan into the global banking system, a huge step forward for Sudan. Things were looking better than ever for the country, and people were hopeful and active towards the big changes. Democracy would be a vessel for ending corruption, and finally make the people take advantage of the incredible natural resources of Sudan's land. After a week, Tim and I got better, and he was finally ready to continue his adventure down south to Cape Town. He left us, and a few days later, an old friend you might already know from our Egyptian adventures, also named Tim, replaced him to stay with us in Khartoum.
Yeah! Oh my God, your beard! Oh, Tim finally arrived in Khartoum, cycling alone in northern Sudan.
We spent most of our days editing videos, filming, and keep learning about the city and its people. But we decided we couldn't stay at Talal's place anymore, even if we wanted to.
We were couch surfing at Talal's place. Amazing person, incredibly hospitable. Unfortunately, living in a neighborhood where the electricity cuts all the time and where it's just unbearable to work there because of the heat and because of the lack of electricity. I can't edit
because in Sudan, there is not a lot of electricity for most of the time.
I received a DM from a girl named Arwa, and she told me, yo, if you're in Khartoum, let me know if you need any help or anything. So I tell Arwa if you could find us a very cheap place that we could rent out in Khartoum that has electricity. She texts me 2 hours later and she tells me, we got your hotel room, stay as long as you want in this hotel room. We covered the costs. Arwa doesn't know me. I don't know Arwa. She's not even in Sudan. She sent her family to help us. She has zero interest in helping us. Her brother delivers all of these groceries to our hotel room for us to have enough foods for the next couple of days.
We have
They brought us like the whole supermarket. We did not ask for anything, and this is what is given to us. I feel I need to speak about this because this is not something that is normal in other countries, I feel. Arwa, if you're watching this, thank you from the depth of our hearts. Really, a little glimpse of what Sudanese hospitality looks like.
Arwa's family invited us to a typical Sudanese dinner a few days later. We had great conversations with her siblings and parents and played with her twin nephews all night.
They're so cute, Jana and Dan. Just a little side note, Sudan is incredible for juices. We've been tasting a whole variety of juices that we've never heard of or tasted before. This specific juice takes about a month to make.
We call also Helou. It's whole processes. Yeah, I can't tell you how they do it. This one is karkade and this one is gungules.
Gungules. We ate delicious homemade dishes and enjoyed the classic hospitality drink, tea or chai.
Thank you so much for hosting us. Thank you.
Now that it was Ramadan, the holiest month for Muslims, various families and friends across Khartoum invited us for iftar, the daily breaking of the fast after sunset. These outings were again proof that Sudan still had life, energy, and community, despite the hardships of life here.
How are we feeling?
Good.
We're having iftar today with some students in a park. It's called Al Riyadh Family Park.
What do you like about Sudan the most?
Surely the hospitality of the Sudanese people, the family bonds that we have here in Sudan, the hope that the people have after the revolution for a better future and for a better outcomes for the country and to grow furthermore. I believe the problem was in the past regime and the past governing system, and I believe it's now taking progress towards being a systemic way of governing the country.
نحن هنا في السودان من أكثر الشعوب العربية اللي فيها تجانس وتقبل. نحن طبعا دولتنا هنا يعني فيها تنوع ثقافي وتنوع عرقي.
بحب الجمعات اللي بتكون تاعت الأسرة.
شو بتحب أكثر شيء بالسودان؟
مطار الخرطوم.
You know, leaving Sudan, unfortunately, even before the war, it was in the prospects of most of the youth. Just the standards of living there were pretty low beforehand. So that's always been in my book. Unfortunately, it's really sad to say nobody really wants to leave their country unless they're forced.
Sudanese people are educated enough and also have good values, and they could be part of any community in the world easily.
But before even considering leaving the country, most of Sudan's youth fought day and night for years to access their basic human rights: freedom, peace, democracy.
During the revolution, the youth get prepared to work together outside of the government offices, and they build themselves to work together in groups as a nation.
I think the youth already started a big role. The neighborhood resistance committees were having seminars where they were talking about transitional justice, they were talking about social development, they were talking about how we as Sudanese people could actually see a future.
So what went wrong? Why did nothing change? The military leaders had promised the protesters a transition to democracy, right? Well, it's not that easy for two generals that have blood on their hands, a high risk of war crime charges, and the need to preserve their sources of power and wealth to give it up just like that because of a bit of civil unrest. So they kept returning on their promise and kept ruling the country. The people were furious. They were promised democracy and were being played with. That led to 8 months of sustained civil disobedience from the people, which was met with violent repression, internet outages, and abuse and massacres towards the protesters. In June of 2019, they perpetrated the Khartoum massacre, in which more than 100 demonstrators were killed at once. Under international pressure and mediation, the military agreed to share power in a temporary joint civilian-military unity government led by a civilian prime minister, Abdallah Hamdok. The civilian-led handover was planned to take place in November of 2021. But a month before the handover, in October of 2021, both Al-Burhan and Hemeti seized power again from the military-led transitional government, in a coup that formed a new military junta led again by Al-Burhan, monopolizing power and halting Sudan's transition to democracy. It was a horrible disappointment.
There was like so many opportunities for this not to happen. We had everything set up in place for this not to happen.
It's a stance. There was a lack of a unified stance. I think that was one of the main issues. It should have been more aggressive. It should have been more calculated.
The most recent point where this could have been prevented is probably just a de-escalation from when the issues arose. I think it was around like April 10th. Before that, you had the coup of October 2021. That was also a stage where all of this could have been prevented.
Again, pro-democracy civilians resisted even more, and since then, people have been protesting around the capital almost daily, even if most people have already given up hope.
Right now, I'm in Adnan, and we're going to be checking what a protest in Khartoum looks like. You can already smell the tear gas. They started shooting tear gas. Oh, fuck. Why are the people protesting, Talat?
Because there is a coup now. 2 years ago, we start a revolution against Bashir, the dictator. We start build our country with the civil government, but again, the military back to charge, and it's a new dictator starts. That's why we protest to stop this and back to the democracy and civil government.
Like in many protests around the world, some of the protesters here were looters, and they were there just for the action. But most of the people I've seen on the streets were young students and teens with motivation, of which a good amount were young women.
It's crazy because all the protesters are kids. It's insane. The kids are coming with rocks from this side, and the cops are right behind this building on the other side of the block. This is the beginning of the protest here.
The mainstream media usually portrays third world countries, particularly in Africa, as uneducated, brainwashed, and dumb. But so far, in Sudan at least, many people I met on the roads and in the capital city are well educated, boys as much as girls.
We met those lovely girls who just finished school, and we've been speaking to them. They're just full of life, making jokes all the time, very curious, also asking a lot of questions.
They all hope and try to contribute to a more equal Sudan, where they have their basic human rights and can use their skills and knowledge while being compensated fairly for it.
We really have a nice people, nice resources, but really we need a good government to make Sudan like other countries. And also the children here, many are smart, we have a good mind, but really no one support the student. We need support.
And instead of giving that support, the government would answer the demands with violence. Yes, even towards the youth and kids. If the Sudanese thought the current state of things was bad and hopeless, little did they know that it was about to get so much worse. To calm the continuously rising tensions, Al-Burhan recently agreed again to give civilians control of the government. However, he had one big condition. He wants the RSF to no longer be an independent military. Al-Burhan wanted the RSF to be part of the official Sudanese army so that he would control it. But Hemeti was obviously not going to let his lucrative business military empire get swallowed by the government. Throughout the years, he had allied himself with Libyan warlords and Russia through the Wagner Group, which trains his men and supplies them with weapons in exchange for very low gold prices and potential control over strategic locations and mines in Sudan.
Like a possible Russian naval base on the Red Sea. It's also said that there's credible proof that Hemeti gets support from the UAE through third-party countries like Chad, as the Emiratis have interests in buying and refining the majority of Sudan's gold. The UAE still denies its involvements to this day. And right now, all those foreign powers are ready to support him in everything he does to secure their own interests.
All the foreign intervention that was there gave the RSF the legitimacy that they needed in order to actually conduct this entire thing. And it could have been avoided if, from the beginning, for the RSF to be dissolved and for actual transitional justice. But then again, what is transitional justice if we don't have a transitional government? We've been in a coup for 2 years now.
And so Hemeti, instead of abiding by the plan of integrating the RSF in the official Sudanese army within a 10-year timetable, decides to do what any power-hungry warlord would do. He starts recruiting members from all across Sudan and mercenaries from neighboring countries, and decides to overthrow the government to lead the country himself. A war has started.
heavy gunfire has been reported in cities in Sudan.
The war began at dawn, with Hemeti sending 2,000 of his men to Al-Burhan's personal residence, a military compound. Al-Burhan narrowly escapes, but the conflict spreads throughout Khartoum, with the two generals disputing control over government sites in the city and progressively throughout the country. Luckily for Flo and I, we had left Khartoum a week prior. We had cycled towards the next country of our journey, Ethiopia. And there, we were met with civil unrest and people shooting in the air all day. We were in a city called Gondar and felt quite unsafe there. But little did we know that in the Sudan we had just left, things were on another level of scary and dangerous. It's been about a week. We arrived in Ethiopia. Just got the news that the RSF have been fighting with gunshots and explosions in Khartoum against the National Sudanese Army. They bombed some planes at the airport. We lived a month there, 5 minutes away from the airport.
2 days before the war, I went to bring my dad from the airport, and there was nothing. April 15, 2 days later, we're in the war.
Things got chaotic quickly, and luckily, I'm able to visually show you how. At that time, I had 3 friends who were still visiting Sudan. Lakshmi, who's American, and Khadija and Ahmed, who are Egyptian. Amid the chaos, they were finding urgent and hectic ways to escape the violence, and each got to document their journey out of a country that was heading into a serious war.
This was bombed last night here.
Dude, look how close this is.
What?
Most media outlets used some of their footage to cover the story internationally.
I've been here for a few weeks and woke up to all-out war happening.
الصوت أنا مش عارف واضح ولا لأ بس بجد مش عارف أوصف لكم. ممكن أهو. يا رب.
This is the door to the rooftop, and as you can tell, it's just absolutely chaos out there.
And there's smoke in every single direction now. I feel like we're surrounded.
So we hear gunshots and bombs in that direction. So I got my drone out, and now I'm gonna fly it.
The only place that could have allowed the Sudanese to flee the country easily was one of the first targets that got brought down, the airport. No one could fly out or in with a plane. Flo, Tim and I lived in the Great Wall Hotel, 5 minutes away from it. If we had stayed longer in Sudan, we would have been caught in the crossfire.
The thing is very complicated. Even the normal person can't understand. Even why did that happen? From my house I can see Bahri full of fire. I can see Khartoum full of fire.
Nobody ever thought that we'd wake up only to find the RSF and the military taking over the city, making it their playground.
They start the war, killing people in the street, harm people in the jails.
We heard rockets, bombs from the first day because they came in a huge number. The windows opens, doors open, small children start to cry.
This war seems to be unexpected, but looking back at Sudan's recent history and the main characters behind it, it wasn't as surprising after all. There would have been a power struggle between the two generals, sooner or later. And it's not the first time that they kill or attack their enemy relentlessly. But this time, things are different. This was a new type of war in Sudan.
Sudan have been in a war for 60 years. It was also civil war between the South Sudan and the North Sudan. And also in Darfur, it's 20 years.
War isn't new to Sudan. That's been the history and that's been the story of Sudan since inception pretty much. Since the Mahdi, since British colonialism, since Ottoman times. Whatever that's a result of, whether it be tribalism, racism, it's, that's a real issue in Sudan. Sectarian issues, all of that. It's never been to this scale. This is wide scale.
It was unexpected that Sudan will be in totally war in every city. You will find guns, you will find people killed, you will find bombs.
Khartoum has always been a safe haven. So that's what sets this conflict apart from all our past issues, with the South, with Darfur, with the Nuba mountains. We've always had conflicts. We're not unfamiliar to conflict. And there is an aspect of selfishness towards that, because obviously Sudanese Arabs are a bit of an elite class when it comes to Sudan. And there's always been desensitization towards the conflicts that were happening in the other regions of the country. A lot of Sudanese people didn't feel like that affected them, or didn't feel like that was about them.
We was watching the wars in the news in the past. Whatever you hear about war, it's totally different than when you be inside the war and see people running, see people being killed.
على الأخبار كل مرة
بنسمع عن السودان انه حرب ومشاكل بس مش الحقيقة انه اوكي في حرب بالجنوب.
Too much people didn't see any war in Sudan. I hear only in news like this, but the news said there is a war in all of Sudan. Not in all of Sudan.
Darfur.
Yes.
The scale of what is happening now is unprecedented. This is all-encompassing. There is not a single Sudani or anybody that calls themselves Sudanese or associates themselves with the country that has not felt the effects of this conflict.
Out of all the people in Sudan, it's only the foreigners and local people who could afford it that first got to escape the violence, leaving most of their belongings behind and taking only the essentials.
Everyone's getting the hell out of this place.
My friends Khadija and Lakshmi went south to flee to Ethiopia, and Ahmed went up north to Egypt. They had to pass through war zones and crossfires by hitching rides.
Last night, I fled Khartoum along with 2 other travelers. We left, we found a few rides that took us out of the city. We hitchhiked out. It was a very difficult situation. No power, no running water, very, very limited internet, and no cash access. Now I am in a school that has been turned into a little refugee camp of sorts to house people who are fleeing from the violence. They were so nice, and they've given us some food and water.
The images they showed me of the northern and southern borders looked completely different from when I had to cross them on our bicycles. It was as hectic and chaotic as it gets. This was the beginning of the biggest humanitarian displacement crisis in recent times, triggered by one emotion: fear of dying in the conflict.
So this is where we have to spend the night. We're getting tea. There's this huge line because I think it's free.
خلصنا الحدود السودانية، جه وقت الزحمة على الحدود المصرية. بصوا المنظر، كمية الناس اللي بتحاول تخش. عدى ساعة ولسه المنظر زي ما انتم شايفين، مفيش حد اتحرك من مكانه.
Ahmed, Lakshmi and Khadija made it safely out of Sudan after all. They were some of the few lucky ones, as they had foreign passports and took the 2 easiest options to get out. Muhammad, luckily, was already in Saudi Arabia for the Eid holidays.
Alhamdulillah, I'm super blessed and very fortunate, and I'm very aware of that. I can transfer, and I'm probably going to go to a different country soon.
But for my other Sudanese friends, things were a lot harder, as they had no option but to stay.
Even inside your room, you're not feeling safe. Every day we go to Netfin to bury someone who's dead.
The sound of the shooting and the bomb, and when you feel your home shaken and expect that this will be maybe your turn.
First 2 months, we were believing that the war will end tomorrow after tomorrow, tomorrow after tomorrow, tomorrow after tomorrow.
I did stay 6 months expecting that this war will end. Sad to say, but it could be continue for years.
After the 2nd month, the things become getting serious. The RSF, when they enter to any area, they let people go out of their houses because they use houses to hide. A lot of our relatives, families, they came to our house. In the 4th month of war, we had almost 100 person in our house. Yeah.
Wow, man.
People just help. Whatever you have, you help with. It doesn't matter if you have is big, small, expensive, easy, hard, you will help with it.
I think Sudanese people are patient enough or maybe strong enough because they still fighting, they still surviving, they still helping each other, connecting. People try to feed each other, make food available for anyone because people lost their jobs, and even the workers, there is nothing to do, there is no money.
I had a lot of stress. Sometimes I need someone to ask me how are you, because you don't think about yourself. You keep thinking about your mother, your sisters, what I'm gonna do if those guys came to our house. Then 2 months from now, 4 rockets fall close to our house. At that time I said I should go out.
I thought that maybe it's better to travel out and find a good place to help my family.
We are mainly 5, my mom, my sister Saragda Radam, my brother Umar, and I am Siddig. We went out without any schedule, without anything. My mom told me, why don't we go to Eritrea?
Both Talal and Siddig left their houses a few months apart to head to safety in the only country that would accept them easily, Eritrea, a country bordering Sudan on the east. In Eritrea, they would apply for visas to travel out of the country to any stable nation that would accept them.
Really, I didn't want to go to Eritrea. Most of my saving was in Sudanese pound. Every day the Sudanese pound is getting low. I sold all my stuff, and it's enough for me to get to Eritrea. And second thing, I was afraid from Eritrea. I didn't know anything about Eritrea.
The journey was risky and treacherous. They had to take specific roads to avoid being seen by the RSF or the army.
The road was very bad. It's very, very bad. Went to Kasala. We got our paperwork ready to get to Eritrea.
Talal, Siddig and his family faced so many more problems than just bad roads during their escape. They also had to fight all sorts of illnesses and health conditions caused by stress and poor food quality, and got all kinds of traumatic encounters and experiences.
The first thing we found, there's a lot of Sudanese people in Eritrea. All of them are same as us. They want to go to KSA or they want to go to other countries, so they have to go to Asmara to take the flight from there to go to those cities.
But the worst problem of all was the visa problems, and some bureaucratic mistakes made the whole process take multiple months instead of weeks, which made both completely broke financially in a country they knew no one that could help.
Every time I get in a problem, Allah give me someone who helps me or give me a solution. So I don't look to the problem, I look that I got a solution.
I'm happy that I have friends in Sudan and outside Sudan. Without them, I wouldn't be able to travel all this time in Eritrea and also from Eritrea to Saudi Arabia.
My friend Joel and I organized a fundraiser to help Siddig and his family leave Eritrea for a safe haven in Saudi Arabia. Thanks to my amazing friend Karim and many others who contributed, we got the money needed in 30 minutes. And it's Khadija and Lakshmi, who got hosted by Talal right after us, who made a fundraising for him to escape Sudan and go to Saudi. The reason why you got help from so many people abroad is because every single person that came to Sudan and that you welcomed, you really marked. I remember when we were hosted by you through couch surfing in Durman, you were so helpful in so many ways.
Travel changed people and people change the world. And again, I'm opening my door for you in Saudi here also.
Oh, you're amazing, man. You're amazing. That's so Talal, always welcoming anyone.
I don't know how to thank you guys, because you really helped me.
You guys hosted us in your houses and took care of us as if we were part of your family.
You already are. You already are.
And the least we could do is to help you guys just not die, basically, you know? And it's our amazing followers who helped us contribute, man.
Talal, Siddig and his family made it safely to Saudi Arabia. And that's how many in Sudan today can cope and survive through this war, whether through helping each other out or through the little foreign aid that is still available. It's a testament to the Sudanese spirit and hospitality. But the reality is that most Sudanese never make it out of the country and are living through hell. Siddig was able to get a last glimpse of this after moving his family out of the country and traveling out himself eventually.
I did a very stupid thing. And all the people like saying why you did that. I went back to Umdurman.
Why?
I don't know if people can understand that, but I have people who I didn't like say bye to them. So I went back and it was bad.
How bad was it?
A rocket came above the bus. The bus moved to the right because the rocket was very close. And it hit the building on our right. I have an uncle who I found him that he came to our house. The RSF beat him because they're saying you are from the army. When he came to the army said you are from the RSF, so they beat him again. The good thing they didn't kill him. My grandfather was all the same. He's in Murabbaat in Umdurman. It's a place full of RSF and he's inside. I tried to enter to get him out, but the army told me even if we let you to enter, they will say you are from the army and they will kill you directly. The problem is he's alone, almost 90, and he's alone, no one is with him. We are used to hear that someone is killed. That's the worst thing. Yeah, like I have my uncle who's died, I didn't even go to his funeral or...
Damn, dude, this is a lot to take in, holy this is fucking heavy, man.
This is what daily life looks like today for the 35 million Sudanese still stuck in Sudan, not able to leave their towns. Siddig and Talal are only 2 of the current 12 million people to have left their houses and most of their belongings behind to live a new, uncertain life, but a safer one at least. Staying in Sudan means limiting yourself to one of the lowest conditions of life on the planet. There's only so much they can do to help each other out with basic needs, and very few get the humanitarian help needed from abroad. That's mainly because there's little coverage of Sudan's war, the dangers that it involves while documenting on the field, and the lack of distribution of the footage available across social media and mainstream news channels. Even in making this documentary, it's been very hard for me to find footage of the war or what has been happening, because that's exactly what the RSF and the SAF want.
They forbid or control the imagery and recordings of Sudan's war to avoid any significant foreign intervention to stop the war and be forced to compromise on their interests. Through that media blackout and their control over the internet, they continue to do what they do with the defined support they get from their international allies, which keeps shifting based on which entity has more chances of winning the war.
It's quite unbelievable to just see all the years, all the time, all your friends who dedicated their lives to the revolution and for it to end up this way. But then again, I think everyone had it coming.
The scale of damage that was achieved within the first week, we would have had, a project of about like a decade to get back on track.
The new generation are used to see bombs, seeing bullets, rockets, and people dead, and not educated. Education stopped in Sudan for like 8 months. Think of those children when they are raised.
What little we did have is now destroyed. The whole country is destroyed. Khartoum is up in flames.
I can't tell you where I see Sudan going because it's just a dark tunnel. There is nothing we could see.
How can you go back to a country that's in ruins? How can you go back to a country with rebels and militiamen, people who don't care about your livelihood, who don't care about your culture, your ways?
For Sudanese now, I can see them in Egypt, in Eritrea, in Ethiopia. They started new business, they started new jobs. Let me ask people that to treat them well and welcoming them in this part, expecting them to be like a good citizen in any countries that they become refuge in it.
I'm afraid that staying here or going out will make me forget about Sudan. I think that's khalas. I don't have a country.
It's hard to tell when Sudan will be at peace again. And the way things look now, it's not headed to a better place. The war is currently expanding through parts of Chad and Central African Republic, and more towns in Sudan, where both the RSF and the SAF are creating mayhem and destruction. But this war is far from being just about the two generals and their militias. More and more countries are using Sudan as a proxy war for their own potential interests, and some more than others. Eritrea, Chad, Uganda, Turkey, Iran, China, the US, and potentially more. But it's hard to tell. Politics and diplomacy are often blurry, and sometimes it's hard to understand clearly who and what's at stake, the fundamental interests of some nations, and the secret alliances that keep shifting as the war evolves. Many studies have shown that the war could potentially stop tomorrow if some foreign powers withdrew from it and discontinued their support, which many countries still deny. But there's one reality about the war that is undeniable. If foreign powers keep getting involved in Sudan, it might turn into another Libya or Yemen scenario, which would lead to devastating consequences regionally and globally over decades, as anarchy, chaos, and crime would reign. Sudan could become a haven for jihadists and terrorists like it once was, and fracture the country in a way that we will all feel it internationally.
Do you think after all of what you've seen, there is still hope for Sudan and for the Sudanese people?
One of the benefits of this war is that Sudanese people will not rest until those people disappear. They did learn well from this war. How to union, how to work together, make the law more strong, give any person his rights. It's a hard lesson, but we did learn it well.
Hope will not go away. But there's a part of me saying to me, there's no Sudan anymore.
I do have hope for the youth, for people of my generation and people younger than me. The second this conflict ends, I know in my heart of hearts that there will be an influx of all the Sudanese who left, all the Sudanese who are internally displaced, all the people of Khartoum that were forced to leave, going back and actually rebuilding.
We don't know when we are going to go back to it. What we are seeing, even from the news, people stop talking about Sudan. So if we didn't take care of or think about our country, nobody is gonna think about it. So it's like a duty to don't forget about Sudan, love our country, and try our best to get it back.
It's been 19 months since the war started in Sudan, and the world has barely heard about it. This is why both Sudanese and non-Sudanese people need to speak up and raise awareness. Public concern and opinion can drive how governments react, from stopping the financing of the war to providing humanitarian relief. How did the Palestinian genocide and the war in Ukraine gain major media and social media attention worldwide for months? How is it possible that a huge number of people who often have no direct ties to the people of Ukraine or Palestine managed to care, speak out, and share information about these conflicts? Well, that's simply because the Palestinian and Ukrainians themselves spoke out and raised awareness about their issues and struggles. They took ownership of sharing their stories, culture, and history, using every means possible to spread the word. This effort brought significant international support, from humanitarian aid to political backing through citizen movements. And the same can happen for Sudan. Yes, many of us abroad have racial empathy bias, which means we tend to care more about people who look like us and have a similar culture to us. But we can fight against this by sharing content about Sudan, bringing the topic into our conversations, emailing members of our parliaments, pressuring governments to stop supporting or interfering in the war, and obviously donating to trusted sources, which I've included links to in the video description. Humans end up caring about what they learn about and understand. And I hope my journey across Sudan has changed your perspective as it did mine, showing you the beauty and the diversity of the region and its inhabitants. Remember, this war was ignited by a few powerful individuals exploiting the rich diversity and tribalism of Sudan to create division, commit atrocities, and stay in power. The unchecked dehumanization of people from Darfur, the Nuba mountains, and other regions has come back to haunt everyone else in Sudan, while those leaders remain in power and unaccountable. Yet, amid this current destruction, there's hope for rebuilding a new Sudan, one where everyone can live together in harmony, embracing their differences in a shared land.
As Sudanese people, from birth, we know that we've inherited this land and we truly have nothing other than it, that's all we have. Despite all the hardships and challenges that Sudan does bring, we still love it.
What makes you Sudanese is the love that we have for the land. It doesn't matter where we're from or what religion or where area, it doesn't matter. In the end, we love this land and this land is ours.
A common saying between the Sudanese youth is like, like we've been burdened by the love of this land. The land, you've seen how it is, bro. It's so hostile, it's hot, it's humid, you got mosquitoes everywhere. It's not a fun place to live, but we still love it. We love it.
Sudan has so much potential, it is insane. Every time I think of what Sudan could have been and what Sudan would be, I just get goosebumps. Our national anthem says, هذه الأرض لنا. This land is ours. And it's not for the RSF, it's not for the military, it's not for the previous regime. They will be gone and it will be ours.
We don't know when we are going to go back to it. If it's in my hand, I want to go back to Khartoum as soon as possible. For all what I can do, like pray that we get Sudan, the whole Sudan back. Inshallah.
It's life, let's say. You do your best, but the destiny is not in your hand.
The way you spoke about your experience, it's like you accept what happens and you try to make the most out of it, and it's just very inspiring, man.
It's Sufism, you memorize.
The day that Sudan opens up, I'm going back. We're gonna rebuild it brick by brick, We're gonna make it. We're gonna make it happen, yeah, man.
Only time will tell what will happen to Sudan. A non-elected government has manipulated civilians countless times into believing into this illusion of freedom and democracy, into a utopia of stability and equality. But one day, this illusion and dream might become a reality. And then, finally, the Sudanese people will once again be able to say,
That's it. You got it, guys. Peace out.
Find peace in the wildest of places. I find war in the wildest of places. I'm a refugee from myself. The homeland pushed me to immigrate. Sudan, Syria, Afghanistan. Sweeping in a mirror trying to see myself. It's foggy, cloudy, disintegrated by mental strain. The amygdala strings are taut beyond relief and spread thin, torn in voyage to sea. The promised land offers no promises. D-Day, Pearl Harbor, the siege of Stalingrad, a crucified picture of anti-Semitic Jews and pork-eating Muslims. beef-eating Hindus and impatient Buddhists. Hampton, Martin, Malcolm float like a butterfly, drown in honey. The Black Panther is not steady on his feet, nor are the Confederate flags raised high. The sirens of red and blue are blinding. The battle between black and white is tangled, dysmorphic reflections of a good kid lost in his mother tongue.
هذه الأرض لنا فليعش سوداننا عالما بين الأمم. عالما بين الأمم.